So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on the EU Plant Reproductive Material Marketing Law, which is organized by ECPGR together with three associations, Arche Noah, Fundación Entretantos, and Rete Semi Rurali. My name is Lorenzo Maggioni, Secretary of ECPGR, and I'm happy to offer you, thanks to our guests, this update on the plant reproductive material. Some of you will remember that this regulation has been drafted by the European Commission and has gone through various steps. At some point last year, many gene banks and members of ECPGR were very concerned about the fact that some obligations, new obligations, and requirements were requested to the gene banks from this regulation. Obviously, many were worried about also many other aspects, but this is the aspect that ECPGR was able to address and to get some consensus about a strong opposition to this type of requirement. And some of you would remember that we were able to produce a statement thanks to the collaboration with Riccardo Bocci from Rete Semi Rurali and François Meinberg from Arche Noah, and with the help of Isabel Lopez from the Alliance of Biodiversity. And this statement was published in December on the page Have Your Say of the European Commission. So I'm not sure if that was the effective element, but there was a strong lobby made for changes in the amendments, and eventually, as it will be explained now by our panelists, a vote from the Parliament in April confirmed a number of amendments that, from our point of view, eliminated that problem, at least for the time being, and included many other interesting amendments that will be now explained. So our guests, Arche Noah, Fundación Entretantos, and Rete Semi Rurali, and the panelists today have been very active lobbyists and following this process very closely. And I'm very happy and thankful for them to give us today an update on the process and the current situation. So we have agreed on offering this webinar with these objectives that are to provide an overview on the negotiations on the reform of the plant reproductive material marketing law, and present the key elements of the original draft that was published in July 23 by the Commission, and the evolution that eventually culminated in the new proposal that was voted at the European Parliament in April 24. And we will focus on key elements for the plant genetic resources, food and agriculture community, and touch upon some critical issues which can still be addressed in the negotiation phase, which is not finished. And they will share possible ways to influence the process at the national level through agricultural ministries. So let me introduce the panelists today. First, we will have a talk by Magdalena Prieler from Arche Noah. Arche Noah is one of Europe's largest private collections of cultivated plant diversity, They have a network of 17,000 supporters and conserve and make available heritage varieties of vegetables, legumes, cereals, fruits, and potatoes, and also adapting them to modern gardening and farming via participatory plant breeding initiatives. Arche Noah leads via a project and advocacy group consisting of Rete Semi Rurali, Fundación Entretantos, Magaz, and Föreningen Sesam. The group aims to influence the new legislation in order to make sure that seed diversity gets promoted instead of restricted. And Magdalena worked over the last year as a policy expert in Brussels and followed the political processes closely. Let me also introduce Maria Carrascosa, who is working for the Fundación Entretantos, which is a Spanish non-governmental organization focusing on sustainable food systems and policies, agroecology, extensive livestock farming, and biodiversity conservation, and which pays special attention to the co-production of knowledge and action, which is why they are committed to dialogue and participation as a means to generate innovation and find new solutions to social and environmental problems. And finally, Gea Galluzzi from Rete Semi Rurali, which is the Italian seed network comprising 35 associated organizations, and with the main focus on conservation and dynamic management of agrobiodiversity and genetic resources in sustainable agricultural and food systems. Farmer-led, locally based innovation has been the main focus of Rete Semi Rurali over the last decade, with many participatory plant breeding initiatives, maintenance of a community seed bank, creation and adaptation of heterogeneous materials, and in general, construction of alternative seed and food system models centered around crop diversity. So we will start with Magdalena, talking about the legislative process. And then we will, this will be followed by a presentation by Gea and Maria on the analysis of the some elements of the proposal. After these presentations, we will have 20 minutes of question and answers or so. And so I'm happy to open this webinar and give the floor to Magdalena, who can now share.
Many thanks, Lorenzo. I will set up my presentation. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. So good morning also from my side. Thanks a lot for the introduction, Lorenzo. So I will jump right into the topic and present the legislative process around this reform. Just in a nutshell, to give you a bit of an understanding where we're standing at the moment, what are the important actors involved, and what will be the next steps following. So, as you probably know, the EU decision-making process is a bit lengthy, has many important steps, but it always starts with a proposal by the European Commission. So you can see it here in the slides as number one, the proposal. In the second step, once the proposal is published, it goes to the two co-legislators. The two co-legislators are, on the one hand, the European Parliament, which then proposes changes to the Commission's proposal, and on the other hand, the Council of the EU. In this topic, it is the Agrifish Council, which deals with the topic and proposes, same as the European Parliament, changes to the Commission's proposal. Once both of the co-legislators have proposed their changes and they do their processes widely apart from each other, so everyone works on their own, then they come together again with the European Commission to what is called the trilogues. So the negotiations between the three institutions, the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the council, the Agrifish Council. So they then negotiate together an agreement of how the new law should look like, which again, the co-legislators, Parliament and Council need to approve then before the new legislation is adopted. So much of the theory, how does it look in this specific case of the Plant Reproductive Material legislation review? We had the proposal, as already explained by Lorenzo, in July 2023, and it went then at the same time to the European Parliament and the Council. And while we have already a position by the European Parliament on how they want to change this proposal by the Commission, the plenary vote on this was in April, we do not have a fixed position by the Agrifish Council yet. So today's webinar, the focus of the content will be on what has the European Parliament decided. And this is sometimes confusing because in national law, once the Parliament has decided it, that's it, then we have the new law. But here it's just this intermediary step of finding the Parliament's position, finding at the same time the Council's position, which will be then the start for the negotiations, the trilogue negotiations. So before going more into the process, I want to also mention that the organizations already presented, the advocacy group, and many, many more seed organizations have been very intensively contacting, on the one hand, members of the European Parliament and also ministries in the different countries, but also doing public work on this topic, like, for example, the campaign Raise Our Forks for Diversity, where we get at signatures. By this time, already 120,000 people signed for our petition, Raise Our Forks for Diversity. And we sent seeds, so many citizens from many, many countries sent seeds to members of the European Parliament. We even asked supporters to call the members. So there was very intensive work done by our organizations to influence this proposal, as we think it's very important for the seed diversity, which will be allowed to be in our archives, in our organizations, but also in fields, in the gardens, and on our plates in the end. Coming back to the process in the European Parliament, so we look at the step 2A now. What happened in the Parliament? On the one hand, they started working on the file in July 2023 when they got it from the Commission with discussions. We also did a lot of information work in this phase because we noticed that members of the European Parliament have very few, some non-information or knowledge about the work we are doing. Also, the public hearing on the topic in November last year was a point when this was very clear. We made an action for this topic where we brought beans to the European Parliament from different seed savers organizations and made clear to MEPs that it wouldn't be allowed anymore to pass these beans to farmers if the proposal passed as proposed by the European Commission. This was one point where MEPs said, okay, that cannot happen. We should not endanger this work. We should support this work. So it was important to show them clearly what the Commission's proposal could mean in practice. Then the next phase was the amendments phase. So all MEPs could bring in suggestions for how this text should be changed. In total, there were about 800 amendments. So 800 suggestions for change. Many of them were going in a good directive supporting conservation work, but they were also going in all different directives. So important was the following phase, the negotiations between the rapporteurs and the shadows. In the European Parliament, for every file, you have one rapporteur, so one MEP main responsible for the file. And then you have shadow rapporteurs from all other political groups, which together with the rapporteur negotiate the entire file. So those 7 members of the European Parliament from all different political groups and their parliamentarian assistants are the most important people, so to say, in the European Parliament, negotiating how this file should look like, how the European Parliament's position should look like. So in the beginning, we saw in the negotiations that the rapporteurs and shadow rapporteurs were quite open towards excluding conservation work from the scope of this legislation, meaning that no seed marketing rules should apply for it. But later, after quite last-minute industry interventions, it became more and more unclear if the Parliament would go in this direction. The next important step was the vote in the ComEnvy, so the Environmental Committee in the Parliament, where we saw in the last minute again some alternative amendments brought in, which would have put everything within the scope of the legislation and which would have drastically endangered conservation work to happen as it can happen today. Luckily, those alternative compromise amendments did not find a majority, so they didn't pass. Also in ComAgri, despite the industry lobbying, a majority was supportive for conservation work. So mainly the European People's Party, together with the Socialists and Democrats, the Greens and the Lefts, voted for amendments that are supportive for conservation work and seed diversity. Again, here we saw that on the side of the far right, but also the Liberals, Renew, were voting mostly against this. Before the vote in plenary in April 2024, which results Maria and Chair will discuss later, we saw that their industry lobbying was then really intensified. We partly also saw fake news around the topic cursating. Partly this also led to some restrictions of the ComAgri position when it comes to conservation work. So not all amendments which were agreed by in the Commission on Agriculture also passed in the plenary vote. But so much for the process. More on the content will be shared a bit later. How does the process in the Agrifish Council look like? The responsible preparatory body, so the body doing all the work on it at the moment, is the Working Party on Genetic Resources and Innovation in Agriculture. I also put the link in there. They have monthly meetings and they go through the proposal article by article. And what is very important is that stakeholders can approach the responsible people in the ministries with feedback as well on the Commission proposal, as well as recommendations how things can be reformulated so it works in practice, so it works on the ground, and so it respects the work that each of you is doing. The ministry officials then bring in their country's position during the meetings of their working party, also after the meetings in written, and they give feedback to the council presidency's proposed text. So at the moment, the council presidency is in the hand of the Belgians. Afterwards, it will be Hungary, and they are always collecting all the feedback and preparing proposals for the entire group, which can be, of course, all feedback from all countries and gives an opportunity also for us stakeholders to give in our feedback via the ministries. There's no general approach found yet. So unlike the Parliament position, as I said already, the position of the ministries is still quite open. They only have progressed like about halfway, so they will still need quite some time until they find a common approach. And it is at the moment very unclear how the council position on conservation work will look like. So there's really a need for more information on conservation work in many countries, as we see that not in every country the people dealing with the file really know about the work we are doing and how it is different from seed marketing. The next step will be then the trilogue. So this can only start once the council has agreed on a general approach, once we have the starting positions. At the moment, it seems most likely that the start of the trilogue will be in the beginning of 2025. but of course that's still unclear. So as said, this will be then the negotiations between Parliament, Agrifish Council and European Commission to agree on a final version of the regulation. So what will be the outcome will in any case be a compromise between the different positions. So a compromise between what the Commission has proposed and what the Commission thinks is good, what the European Parliament has now agreed on, and we will talk about later, and what the Agrifish Council will agree on in the next months. After the trilogue has ended, both the European Parliament and the Agrifish Council need then to vote on the trilogue agreement to adopt the final legislation. And as a last slide, I want to present some preliminary conclusions. So what we saw also in the process over the last years is that there's little knowledge about the work for the conservation and sustainable use of plant genetic resources. And this is as well true for the members of the European Parliament as for people in ministries in many countries dealing with the file at the moment, and for the European Commission. So, for example, often there's no distinction made between the highly regulated seed marketing and conservation work. So often there's the understanding, okay, if you pass on seeds, no matter in which way, that's seed marketing, that should be regulated as seed marketing. And this is not because they want very strict rules for this work, but because they don't know the practice of this work. Many of the actors don't know the practice of this work, how it works, what is important for it, and so on. So I think it's our task, all of our task, to bring this work, its goals, and how it works also closer to the decision makers. Because we see that there is openness, there is supportiveness for the topic once explained properly. And for example, in the European Parliament, we saw that there were many good amendments, that there was really openness in the negotiations once it is explained how this work works. So as I said already, with the bean action, really showing parliamentarians, okay, this could be forbidden in future if you do not change anything. Also, the ECPGR statement, which Lorenzo already talked about, was very important in this because MEPs saw, okay, we have a problem there, we need to change something. So this is very important to show. Of course, what was also very important is were many individual meetings of really explaining what the work is and how it's done. We see at the moment that the rationale of the European Commission is keep nearly everything in the scope. So they want to regulate the entire field. So that's their starting point, I would say. So while the position of the European Parliament is much more favorable for seed diversity now, the European Commission really wants to have like a, let's say, tight hold on everything in the field. And we know that without convincing both the ministries and the European Commission about the importance of conservation work, it will be most likely restricted by new PRM regulation after the trilogues. So my final message here, the Parliament alone and the good Parliament position alone is not enough. We really need to look at all three institutions and gain some understanding for our work in all three institutions.
That was a very clear presentation. And I see that there are hands raised or chats, but we will let the questions go after the next presentation. And please note there is a Q&A dialogue button at the bottom. We prefer if you use that one. I thought the chat was not working, but it is working, so there is a bit much overload of interaction, I think. But let's go to the next presentation with Jaya. You have the floor and you can share. Thank you very much, Jaya.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can see my screen in presentation mode. Okay. So I will start without further ado, thanking Lorenzo very much for his introduction and Magdalena for the overall description of the process. I will start from just walking you through some selected elements that we thought would be most interesting for the PGRFA community represented in this webinar. I will talk about the scope of the legislation, which is possibly most familiar to some of you because of the statement that was released and the main concern that involved many of you at the end of last year. I will touch upon some selected definitions which help us understand the scope of the legislation as initially defined by the Commission and how it was then smoothened out and changed in the parliamentary version. And I will start talking about some of the main derogations, and then I will leave the floor to Maria for the others. So in terms of scope, as Magdalena mentioned, the initial proposal by the Commission, which is what I'm describing here on this slide, was of an extremely broad scope of the legislation, in line with the Commission's intention to really keep everything under their control or sort of uniform the whole field. So the regulation was intended to apply to PRM production, transfer, and sale, and it applied to a limited set of species which were defined in Annex 1, regulated species. Here, basically, the Commission just took the species that are already currently regulated under the various directives that constitute the seed marketing legislation as of today. What the regulation did not apply to was to the sale, transfer of PRM, either free of charge or not, between final users. I'll come to that definition in a moment. So basically for activities that were only concerning private use and outside any commercial activity. It also did not apply to research and breeding, but these were basically the only two outright exclusions from scope that the Commission proposed. Any other activity done by so-called professional operators, this was also a new figure introduced by the draft proposal, were considered to be marketing as a rule. And any tweaking of these activities or any smaller exceptions to the marketing rules were to be achieved through derogations, but not through an outright exclusion from the scope. Some definitions, all the definitions of the Commission proposal were, well, still are, even in this newer version voted by the Parliament, contained in Article 3. Some of these are useful to understand the scope and the exclusion from the scope, so I've reported them here. The definition of professional operator, as I mentioned before, is new, and it was a very broad definition. Basically, anyone involved professionally in any of the PRM value chain steps from production to marketing up to labeling and testing is a professional operator. In a similar way, marketing is defined as any activities conducted by a professional operator, including transfer for free or any sort of offering or distribution within the union of PRM would be considered marketing. Finally, a useful definition here is one of the final user. So one of the only figures that would be exempted from the scope. A final user was defined as anyone acquiring, transferring, or using PRM for purposes outside that person's professional activities. So basically, the final users were only hobby gardeners or people really not involved professionally with seeds. Of course, this is broader than seeds, but we use the PRM and seeds as somewhat interchangeably for the sake of this talk. Sorry, so this was very problematic for a number of us meaning conservation organizations that are represented here and who are talking to you today, but also for people involved in more formal institutional public ex situ conservation, such as in national gene banks. And that is also how and why we sort of joined forces or had these discussions with the ECPGR as a whole to flag this problem to the Commission and then to MEPs throughout the lobbying work. The combination of actions that Magdalena described led to significant improvements in terms of scope in the parliamentary vote. So as of now, and again, this is nothing written in stone, this is just the parliamentary position, some changes have been made both to Article 2, defining what is excluded from the scope, and to Article 3 in the relevant definitions. Well, more crop species were added. This was not really something we lobbied for, but I guess it was maybe part of the compromise. Some new species were added, especially plant protein crops. But most importantly, maybe for the seminar, is that Article 2.4, E was amended so that PRM transferred for on-farm research and for gene banking activities were exempted from all marketing rules. And in italics is the actual text of the new article. What was also added in Article 2 was that PRM produced by farmers for their own use would be exempted. This was also added. And in terms of definitions, sort of a commercial trigger was introduced to the definition of professional operator and of marketing. So as of now, professional operator means any natural or legal person involved in any of the activities along the PRM value chain, as I mentioned before, concerning the commercial exploitation of PRM. So there is this sort of commercial trigger that has come in. And in a similar way, marketing also bears this commercial intention. It has to be aimed at, so whatever a professional operator does has to be aimed at the commercial exploitation of the PRM. And final user has also, the definition of final user has also slightly changed. It is whoever acquires, transfer, and uses PRM for purposes that lie outside of their primary professional activities. So, for example, if you are a farmer, so you are a professional operator, your main professional activity is a commercial activity that deals with seeds and PRMs. You can still have something happening outside your primary professional activity with seeds, with PRM, that is allowed to occur without falling under the definition of marketing and the scope of this regulation. Another very, very important and completely new in the parliamentary position exception in Article 2, so exclusions from the scope, was this newly introduced exception for dynamic conservation. And although this, so this is not strictly related to gene banks. Indeed, it is an exception developed mostly for conservation organizations. So more the kind of organizations like Arche Noah, Rete Semi Rurali, and Fundación Entretantos, and many others in Europe. We thought it would be interesting for the PGRFA community and for any of you who are listening, who may be involved or interested in on-farm conservation. This exception is represented in Article 2.4, A, and it states that the production and marketing of PRM by conservation organizations and networks, they are referred to in Article 29, provided that it is in small quantities, defined in an annex, can be allowed out of the marketing rules for the purpose of dynamic conservation. The annex describes some quantities. I'll show it briefly later, but this is not the main point now. What is important here is that dynamic conservation is a term that many of our organizations have been sort of promoting and working on for the last decade or maybe more, and to see it picked up and reflected in a piece of law about seed marketing again, it is not written in stone, was really innovative and a strong signal from the European Parliament of their intention to be innovative and to change the scenario a bit in favor of diversity and genetic resource conservation through use. They even introduced a definition in Article 3 of dynamic conservation. It includes both in situ and ex situ conservation approaches. It mentions the sustainable use of plant genetic resources and agrobiodiversity. It mentions somewhat indirectly the risks of genetic erosion and the need to meet the needs and aspirations of present and future generations, which is also a somewhat innovative and maybe unusual language for a seed marketing law. And this could have great relevance not only for Europe, but also for other countries, especially in the global south, who may be looking at European legislation as a starting point or as a model for developing more innovative pieces of legislation on seeds for small-scale farmers in the global south and biological diversity in the global south. So we thought this was worth mentioning. These are the quantities. I won't spend too much time on this slide. It's just for you to know that they're pretty much acceptable for the kind of work that our organizations do in terms of distributing diversity to farmers or to territories where innovation may be happening on the ground. So now from the scope, I will move into the first derogation. So this, what I've been talking about until now, is what has been put out of the scope. These are derogations. So they're in the scope, but depending on actors or types of seeds, they have some special rules. So the first derogation I will talk about is about conservation varieties. Many of you involved maybe in on-farm conservation have an idea already of what this is, because it's something that has been existing in the legislation for some time. But the Commission proposal widened the definition of conservation varieties already to old land races and new cultivars, and expanded it to all crop species, provided that they had a high level of genetic, that the variety in question had a high level of genetic and phenotypic diversity. And here in italics is the definition of the Commission's proposal. In terms of rules for registration of the variety and the production rules, they are laid out in the Article 53 and 26. Registration is based on a simplified pathway, so there needs to be an officially recognized description with an indication of the region of origin. The registration of a conservation variety is valid for 10 years, can be renewed, and it cannot be immediately adopted for varieties deleted from the official register in the last 2 years. So you can't immediately shift a deleted variety from the formal register to the conservation variety scheme. Production rules are laid out in Article 26, and for conservation varieties, the standard material, standard seeds rules, production rules apply as laid out in the articles I mentioned, Article 8 and Annex 3. This was already quite good in terms of giving more options to anybody interested in registering conservation varieties. After there's some negotiation and some tweaking of the language and of the rules, the definition in the EP outcome is even more inclusive. So it's again about old and new cultivars. There's a mention of so-called modern land races obtained by on-farm selection or local adaptation and sustainable use. The high level of genetic and phenotypic diversity was tuned down to satisfactory. Some of our organizations pointed out that it is not always the case that old land races or newly bred varieties have a necessarily high level of diversity. And the prohibition for conservation varieties to be F1 hybrids and to carry any intellectual property right limitation on them was introduced. The prohibition that conservation varieties are GM or NGT crop varieties did not pass, but the registration was maintained free of charge, but was lengthened up to 30 years. So yeah, basically there's been an enlargement of what the conservation variety scheme is. I think I will stop sharing now, and Maria will share basically the same presentation, but from her slides on. So stop share. Okay, and I'll pass it on to you, Maria.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Do you see my screen? Yeah. And thank you, Lorenzo, and the ECPGR to organize this webinar today. Okay, so I am going to jump to another derogation, that is the derogation on heterogeneous material. This concept of heterogeneous material was introduced for the first time in 2018 in the organic regulation. It was a way to open, to go beyond varieties and to open spaces to biodiversity in the organic systems. So in this proposal of the European Commission, they introduced the definition of heterogeneous material with the same definition of the organic heterogeneous material, but non-organic, being non-organic. And what is this heterogeneous material about? So it means a plan and grouping within a single botanical taxon of the lowest known rank, which presents phenotypic characteristics, common ones. It has a high level of genetic and phenotypic diversity. Is not a variety, so in the sense of the regulation on community plant variety rights, and is not a mixture of varieties. We are going to see this definition also, as I said, on the organic regulation and on the proposal of the European Commission in Article 3. Then we go to the derogations part, to the derogations article, and we are going to see in Article 27 how to manage the derogation when using heterogeneous material. So the first important thing is that in the European Commission proposal, they were proposing to remove the organic heterogeneous material regime, introducing an Article 81 that was that amended the organic regulation. And this was very, let's say, contested by the organic movement. Then, in this proposal, they proposed a notification system through this Article 27 with a list register at the national level of this heterogeneous material, with a set of rules for traceability, production, and trading that you can see in the Annex 6, and to making compulsory for operators to notify the species and the quantity marketed as heterogeneous material yearly. The European Parliament proposal, from our point of view, makes better the European Commission one, because firstly, it listens the organic sector and it doesn't amend the European organic regulation, so it deletes this Article 81, so it maintains the organic heterogeneous material in the organic regulation. Then it aligns the heterogeneous material more with the organic heterogeneous material regime. So notification is free of charge, and this is important for micro enterprises and other type of associations that are working in the marketing of cultivated biodiversity. And authorities need to respond within 3 months for the notification if they accept the notification of the heterogeneous material. There is, in this proposal of the European Parliament, there is no need to notify species and quantities annually to authorities. So the administrative requirements for the initiatives are lower. But there is not an explicit prohibition, as in conservation varieties, on the use of NGT, GM, or patents. This is not present as in the binding text. The European Parliament proposed to take out further species from heterogeneous material. So we lost this group of species, but because we were proposing to have all of them. So not possible to have HM of further plants. And non-professional operators cannot notify heterogeneous material. And for some organizations, this is important as we cooperate with professional operators. And one way to cooperate is to do these kind of tasks. So to notify heterogeneous material, and this is not possible. Sorry, a second, I don't see my slide. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, let's jump to the next derogation, which is in Article 28 and is related to PRM marketed to final users. So in the European Commission proposal, this PRM must be sold by professional operators, and this is different to other type of derogation that we will see later. Non-registered varieties also can be sold, and this is included in Article 5. It can only be sold PRM in small packages to final users, and seeds need to be practically free from quality pests. This is a very new, as Jaya or Magdalena, I don't remember, said before, this is a very new typology of derogation, as in the previous legislation, we didn't have this path to sell non-registered variety to final users directly. The European Parliament has stopped, let's say, has not given more power, delegated power to the European Commission to define rules on form, handling, and sealing on packages. And they have established the amount of seeds that can be in these small packages. From this proposal, there will be no requirements in notifying annually to the authority the species and the quantities that are being sold, which again is less bureaucratic burdens for the initiatives. The next derogation, that is the one more related to the work you are doing, of course, is the derogation in Article 29 that is for PRM marketed to and between gene banks, organizations, and networks. So I think it was the first time that you, as gene bank, some of you were included as such in the PRM legislation, PRM marketing legislation. So in the European Commission proposal, it includes the marketing to final users, not farmers, so just final users as defined in this European Commission proposal, so more gardeners. The activity needs to be done for non-profit purposes. Non-registered varieties can also be marketed. gene banks are organizations and networks. They need to keep a register with the PRM description that has been marketed. They need to conserve and make available samples to authorities upon request. Seeds need to be practically free from quality pests and defects, and they need to have satisfactory vigor, dimensions, and germinations. And they need to communicate the use of the derogation and the species concerned. As you can see, it's a quite blocking, let's say, article. But then the European Commission, I think it came up with a better proposal. On the one hand, as Jaya explained before, gene banks are going to be in this proposal are out of the scope of the legislation. So this is great, and they give a little bit more of a space of freedom for the conservation organizations to work reintroducing cultivated biodiversity in the fields and in the plates. So the name of the article with this in mind changed completely. So it talks about PRN marketed to, by, between, and within organizations and network dedicated to dynamic conservation. As we were saying before, the transfer for monetary compensation or free of charge of limited quantities, so under those that Jaya shared with you before, for dynamic conservation purposes is outside the scope. So for a seed network ecosystem, let's say, this is good news. We would like to go beyond, but at least that is very good news. And beyond such quantities and for dynamic conservation and farming purposes, and this is very important because it's possible to market to farmers, whereas in the European Commission proposal it wasn't. These activities regulated through this article. As farmers can be members of those organizations, the article allows them also to transfer PRM. And this is also a very good news. There is no more a statutory objective needed as it was in the European Commission proposal. But for the European Parliament, activities need to be carried for non-profit purposes, which is normally what a conservation organization do. Samples need to be given to authorities on request only when the amounts, the quantity allow it, which is not always the case. And so the introduction of this element is interesting, it's important. Seed health rules are still present, which can be complicated for some actors. No more rules on vigor, dimension, and germination capacity, good news. And conservation organizations are accepted if they are professional operators, which is not compulsory if they are in Article 29. They are not obliged to have traceability requirements and other administrative obligations that are in Article 41 and 42. The last derogation that is present, the main one, regarding more linked to the cultivated biodiversity management, is in Article 30 that talks about the seed exchange in kind between farmers. At least this was the title in the European Commission proposal, where a set of conditions and requirements was set up. So those seeds need to be seeds produced in the farmers in their own farm. They need to come from their own harvest. they need not to be subject to a service contract, and its use is for the purpose of contributing to agrobiodiversity. Regarding the requirements, they don't need to be a protected variety, so not protected varieties are allowed. They are sold in small quantities defined by member states. Seeds need to be practically free from quality pests and defects and satisfactory germination capacity. And again, this is open to unregistered varieties. The European Parliament proposal is wider. It's from our perspective is better because they go beyond seeds to PRM. So it regulates the right of farmers to exchange their own PRM, so seed potatoes, also fruit tree cuttings, in small quantities, in kind or in exchange for financial compensation. And this is broader than the proposal of the European Commission. Free exchanges are possible, so out of the scope of the legislation, as long as they are not intended for commercial exploitation of the seeds, with the definition of commercial exploitation that they are presented before in this proposal of the European Parliament. The quantity limits are set by the European Commission, so not at the national level, but at least taking into account the needs of smallholders' production. Seed health rules apply again, and this can be a constraint for farmers to exchange. There is no prohibition to exchange GM, NGT, or patented material in this article. And as in Article 29, for farmers that are professional operators, that is not compulsory, they don't need to fulfill the administrative obligation and traceability requirements in Article 41 and 42. And this is important also to enhance those farmers to become professional operators. And this is all from my side, and I pass on Magdalena.
Yes, maybe you can still leave the slide on just for the last. There'll be just one more slide from my side. After all the good news that Gea and Maria brought to you about the European Parliament's position, I have the role again to show you a nice landscape and to also give you some more ideas on your way on how you and we all can contribute to the process at European, at national, and at regional levels. If you could go to the next slide. Yes, to secure a good result, because as I said already in the beginning, we definitely need further awareness raising on the importance of the conservation and sustainable use of plant genetic resources, and why the marketing rules and further administrative burden would be a threat. Because only if decision makers in the different institutions know what is needed, they can take it into account. So we've gathered some possible actions for the next month, which I just want to present to you, so every one of you can see if there's something that you can contribute to this. So on the European level, what is possibility, similar to what you did already with your statement, is like for influencing the European Commission, a joint letter or individual letters to the European Commission can be a good step to show what the conservation work is and what is needed for it. Also, a possibility is we're hoping to organize, or we're planning to organize an event in the European Parliament in winter, on the plant reproductive material reform. So you're very welcome to participate in this, also as a speaker or organizer, or if you're interested in this, please let me know. Then another option would be to organize a webinar or an event for the negotiators of the council, either online or in Brussels, to really, as it is done from time to time during these negotiations, that there's the light or the focus shed on some issues, some topic, so the people negotiating this file in the council get a better understanding of these questions or these topics in question. But there are also many possible actions on national level, for example, to reach out to national representatives in the council working group to inform them about concerns regarding conservation. So either to organize a meeting with them or to use like working groups in which you might be involved to really help with your technical knowledge, with your understanding about this. Also, informing via your own channels can be helpful, so social media or newsletter or other channels you use, or media work on the risk to the conservation presented by the draft proposal. So everything which helps generate some attention on the topic can be helpful for a good result. And on an individual level, it's, of course, we also invite you to sign and share the petition, Raise Our Forks, which I presented shortly in the beginning. Many thanks also from my side.
Thank you very much, Magdalena, Maria, and Gea. That was a very clear round presentations, and I think very useful, and generated probably a lot of interesting also questions, and it's not an easy to digest group of legal aspects, but it was very clear. There are already some questions or raised hands, so let's start with raised hands. Keely Watson, do you want to? Should be unmuted. Nor, can you unmute Keely Watson?
Yes, I've asked Keely to unmute. I don't know if she can unmute now.
Like to unmute yourself, Keely. And the hand was unraised, so maybe it was a mistake. So let's see, Rikos Thanopoulos. Rikos, can you talk?
Good morning. Congratulations for this nice webinar. I would like to ask Magdalena if the European Parliament elections can influence the procedure and can change, let's say, the situation. I mean that you have a new body in Parliament, you have maybe new rapporteur, new shadows, and so on. Maybe so. Can this influence or change the things dramatically, or have to continue in the same way as the old body decide? Thanks.
Yes, that's a very good question. So theoretically, the new parliament could even reopen the position the old parliament has decided on, but that's very rarely happening. So that it's quite difficult to do that, and there needs to be a lot of political will or unhappiness with what has been decided. So it's very, very, very unlikely that this is happening. So the new parliament will start working with the position the old parliament has found. Still, the elections, of course, do influence the file quite a lot. As you said, some of the people working on the file will most probably not be in the European Parliament again anymore. And those which are rapporteurs and shadow rapporteurs are the ones leading the negotiations later on with the trilogue. So changes there will also result changes in how the negotiations will look like. And maybe a third factor, A new parliament also means that there will be a lot of new members of the European Parliament who have not dealt with the file at all until now, so they have no knowledge about it, but they will be voting about it also again after the trilogues. So also this is a factor where we have a change. That's also why we are considering organizing an event in the European Parliament on this topic to really show also all the new MEPs what is at stake at this topic, with this topic.
Thank you, Magdalena. And yes, it's clear that everything can change. Even the Commission will be a new one. So European
also in the Commission,
citizens,
yeah, we had a big change there. So Dorothee André, who was leading the plant health unit responsible for this file, just changed jobs. So also in the Commission, there will be, there is a change of people dealing with the file at the moment, yes.
So European citizens and the attendees, remember to go and vote next week. You have an opportunity. Other questions. So we have questions in the questions and answers from Isabel. Very interesting, informative presentation. You have already answered, Magdalena, but it's maybe useful to say. Very interesting. Does the Parliament proposal still require officially recognized description of conservation varieties as one of the conditions for registration of these varieties? If so, how will this be done for new conservation varieties? Magdalena, you want to explain to the audience your answer?
Yes, I can do so. So there will be, for conservation varieties, there will be still an officially recognized description foreseen. So both the Commission and the Parliament foresee it this way. This description should be based on, can be based on unofficial tests, on knowledge gained from practical experience during cultivation, reproduction and use, or on other information, in particular from plant genetic resource authorities or from organizations recognized for this purpose on the member state. So it's quite open, which is good, how the information can be gained for this officially recognized description. However, the European Commission foresees then that they can change how this information needs to be brought together. So they foresee an implementing act where they can later on change the characteristics and information needed. And the European Parliament says, no, that's not needed. We have all the rules here. And the European Parliament therefore deletes this implementing act, as it could be dangerous that later on then the Commission comes up with rules for this, which are not so suitable to the work on the ground. Again, how it will be final, we cannot say yet because we missed the Council's position.
If I can jump in, one important question is that once this regulation enters into force, for the European Commission, only the registered conservation varieties will become conservation varieties, but not the non-intrinsic value varieties and DOR fruits. Whereas in the European Parliament proposal, also those varieties, non-intrinsic value and these fruits, DOR, we say in Spanish, sorry, I don't know in English, they will enter into the conservation variety register. So this is a very good news and a very good path for all of those varieties that otherwise would be lost.
Thank you, Maria. Let's see if there are other questions, clarifications. Or I could ask a question. What do you think are the changes that the European Parliament introduced that are more at risk of being again changed or returned to the starting point from your point of view, and based on oppositions from from other stakeholders, and if you can also say what is something about the rationale for this conflict. Maybe it's too complicated area, but if anyone feels like answering, what do you feel it's more at risk due to the conflictual situation?
I can start, and maybe Magdalena, who is definitely more aware of process and actors and influencing and lobbying work at European level.
And one point, sorry, Gea, and especially gene banks, do you think that aspect is still at risk, or has it been acknowledged?
Well, yeah, in fact, I was going to start from that. My feeling, and I think it's sort of shared, but I'll make it my feeling, is that the gene bank exclusion is a bit more straightforward than, for example, the exemption and exclusion of conservation organizations and networks. At least it's a bit safer from industry than what conservation organizations and networks are perceived to be. And it's also potentially a bit safer because, and I think you might be aware of this too, Lorenzo, having attended the governing body, the last governing body meeting of the treaty. Apparently, from what I heard, the Commission itself sort of realized or recognized that they had that gene bank exemption, or that putting gene banks into the marketing law had sort of slipped out of their control slightly. It wasn't really their intention. Maybe it wasn't their intention to put conservation organizations there either, but then of course, when you come to industries or seed companies' view, they have much more opposition, and they'll be lobbying stronger, not so much against the gene banks being out of the scope, but maybe organizations such as ours, which do very niche, very, very small scale and very niche seed distribution work. But the narrative, I think Magdalena referred to that as the fake news that were thrown out just before the parliamentary vote by the industrial lobbying groups, was that the seed system, the seed market would be flooded with seeds where there's no traceability, there's no control, there's no quality, and because there were too many openings and too many derogations for actors, activities, and types of materials. So I think the major, and this whole opening to dynamic conservation, I mean, from the point of view of industry, is something maybe, more difficult to accept. But maybe Magdalena, you'd like to add some more details to that.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, and I see that like the discourse is now very much on meta level. So there's not so much a discourse about the single points or what is written there or here, but it's really about, in many cases, this like discourse of like seed quality, seed health, all of that would be in danger if there are too many derogations. So it's always said, okay, there are too many say there are too many derogations already introduced by the European Commission, and then more derogations by the European Parliament. So all of that is often pointed now to as a threat because of these general reasons. And so I think this general discourse is something we need to be very aware of, and we need to be able to also debunk a bit, and also really show what is the work we are doing and why is the work we're doing really relevant for society and helpful for society, because we're not doing this to pose a risk to society in the end, but to really do a helpful service for society, which might not, which in the end, if other narratives are more successful, might get lost in this. So what I see as really endangered in the process is really this putting everything which is happening for the aim of conservation outside the scope of the legislation. So no matter which actor is doing it, if it's for the aim of conservation, it's outside the scope. That's something which is very unclear if it will pass this way. Also, for example, for conservation varieties, there are discussions that there shouldn't be any new conservation varieties. It should only be old ones. which is also a very critical point for farmers exchange. There are discussions about further narrowing down the regions in which it can be exchanged. So there are, I think, many topics. Like, I think all topics are still up for discussion, but under this general narrative of not making too many derogations, which seems to be, or which is pointed to be like a threat.
And for me, there is another thing that is related to misappropriation, participation, and governance and transparency. There was nothing in the proposal of the European Commission, and then the European Parliament came up with some actions regarding transparency. So being compulsory to communicate the breeding method and to communicate the IPR within the material and to put this in the label. This we have been asking for that many years, and it's the first time that we see this in a piece of at least of a proposal of the European Parliament. So this is something that we need to keep. On the other hand, as I said before, in misappropriation there was nothing. And the proposal of the European Parliament, they are not just trying to take care about denominations and materials, just asking and seeing what is registered already, but they propose to ask gene banks and other conservation organizations and network the materials that they have, so to avoid misappropriation of denomination and materials. And this is completely new, and we need to maintain also that. And regarding participation, there is nothing at all in the European Commission proposal, in the European Parliament proposal, and we really need to open spaces for participation at the national level. So I think that this is something that we will need to push in the coming months.
Thank you, Maria and Magdalena and Gea. Let's see if there are other questions or clarifications, comments. So if not, we go towards closing this.
Lorenzo, there are two questions from
Two
Gordana
questions.
and Ricos again.
Where?
Gordana and Ricos.
Hands raised?
Yes.
Yes, Gordana. Sorry, I didn't see that. Gordana, go ahead. If you can unmute yourself.
She says that she has a problem with the setting.
Okay, can you write the question in the Q&A? Okay, well, either Gordana writes the question or she will get back to you. Yes, she can communicate later. Okay, I do not see other hands raised or questions.
I see Ricos.
Or there is one.
Oh.
Ricos. Ricos, go ahead.
Sorry, if the questions are finished, then I would like to make a few comments.
You can. Go ahead.
Can I?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I would like to stress on land races, thinking that they are very important for farm conservation. So the first point is that really the definition is not full I mean that indirectly in the Article 53.2 introduced the obsolete varieties, which is a reality. If we see the application of the regulations till now, I draw some examples from our last article. 100% of Polish conservation varieties are obsolete varieties. In Estonia is the 73. In Sweden is the 52 conservation varieties, obsolete varieties. And in Italy, 22. So obsolete varieties are not bad, of course. They take a portion of conservation varieties, but this is not clearly distinguished also in the new regulation. So I think that we have to put in the definition, but also to clear inside that we have two categories or three if we add also the new land races. This is the one point. The second point is that the professional operator, I think that is has a negative effect because should be professional. So the farmer, in the reality, is very difficult to make the whole procedure, and should be registered as professional operator, which needs 7 requirements with a lab, with so and so on. So we have now a new situation where after some centuries, the regulation says that the farmers are not able to handle and to manage their own genetic material. I think that farmers and cooperatives should remain as the maintainer of the land races, of course with guidelines, but this is I think the point that should not be under professional operator. This will be a very, very serious problem. And the last comment which I'd like to make is that the denomination rules, according to the Article 54, is based on cultivar approach. But this approach, it's the opposite of what happened in practice with the land races. Land races have traditional names, which can describe the color, the taste, and so on, which is not allowed by cultivars rules. So also in this article should be a derogation that the traditional names of land races will be accepted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rikos. Any reactions to Rikos' comments?
Regarding farmers being professional operators, if they want to sell, let's say, not through the derogation, they need to be professional operator. But if they are under Article 30, they don't need to be professional operator. They have this space not to be in professional operator. But I agree with you that if we want to enhance and to develop the right of farmers to sell and exchange seeds, this is not enough at all. And being professional operator, we need, let's say, lighter rules for farmers. Need lighter rules to be able to produce and sell seeds in an easy way.
Yes, Maria, maybe I was not clear. I focus that in order to register a land race conservation variety has to be
professional operator.
This is the point, the main point.
This is a very bad. Yes,
this is the point. It's not. I agree with what you say, but the key point is that we make more bureaucratic the whole procedure to register a land race on the registered variety and so on. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Rikos. So we close now this this webinar. I would like to thank very much Maria, Magdalena, and Gea, and it's a good example that we have made. I think we can have other webinars in the future, and also other guests can, let's say, offer to give. And you have seen the process will be still long, so there are opportunities to contact the associations if you want to lobby together, and ECPGR will be looking at the process, which is very long and probably bumpy, I'm afraid, considering the coming elections. And thank you very much for attending, all the participants. This will be also available for listening to it on YouTube, I think, and we will send the link to everyone. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.